Week 9 of the fantasy baseball season, and here's a few hitters I look to buy and trade for this week. The first guy, Juan Soto of the Washington Nationals. I know I mentioned Soto last week as a guy I would look to buy low and trade for. And right here, the power's come back a little bit for Soto over the last few weeks, but his numbers are still down in the dumps. For Soto's obviously track record on the season, 12 home runs, 21 RBIs, 32 runs scored, 5 stolen bases, a 226 average, which is way down there for him, and a 371 on base. So over the last month here, 192 average, but he does have 6 home runs and 13 RBIs. And this guy's always an on-base machine, and he's still putting the ball in play, only 39 strikeouts in 208 at-bats. So we know Soto's always been a guy that'll go up there and give you a good at-bat. But right now, he's not finding the holes. And obviously, the protection in the lineup ain't all that great, even though he still has Nelson Cruz, who they signed this offseason, and Josh Bell in that national lineup. So the last few games here for Soto, June 2nd at the Reds 0 for 4. June 3rd at the Reds 1 for 4 with a homer in an RBI. June 4th, it looks like he was going to break out of it at Cincinnati, 2 for 5, 2 home runs, 4 RBIs. But June 5th at Cincinnati, 0 for 4. June 7th at the Marlins, 0 for 2. And June 8th at the Marlins, 1 for 4. So right here, Soto, he's just been struggling this whole season here with the batting average. His on-base is still great this year from batting average to on-base ratio. And the power is still pretty good with the 12 home runs. So he definitely still could finish the season anywhere from 25 to 30 homers. But right now, this guy went number 1 pick in a lot of fantasy drafts entering the season. Right now, he hasn't lived up to those expectations. So right now, with the low batting average and the horrible RBIs, only 21 with 12 home runs, it's a perfect time to go out there and get him because the weather's warming up big time now. And once this guy gets going, there's no turning back getting him on a discount. So this would be the time to go out there and pounce on Soto. The next guy is Ruchman of the Baltimore Orioles. So Ruchman, the top prospect in all Major League Baseball coming into the season, is the catcher here. And so far, he's been overpowered and overmatched. 8 for 55, 5 runs scored, no home runs, no RBIs, 15 strikeouts, a 145 average, and a 230 on base. So right here, this guy, he's just slumping in the early going, and he's not getting anything going. When he was the hottest pickup, obviously, a few weeks ago, when him and Dolan Gorman, 2 top hitters possibly in the minors, came up. So right here, the last few games for Ruchman, May 28th at Boston, 0 for 3. May 29th at Boston, 0 for 2 with a run. May 30th at Boston, 2 for 5. May 31st versus the Mariners, 0 for 4. June 2nd versus the Mariners, 0 for 4 with a run. Versus the Guardians, 0 for 4. June 5th versus the Guardians, 0 for 4. And June 7th versus the Cubs, 1 for 4. So right here, a lot of offers, a 1 for 4s, 1 for 5s here for Ruchman. But right now, well, he's done nothing in his major league career. In the first few weeks being up, this is a perfect time to go out there and get him because he's not going to be a number 1 prospect for no reason. Even though we've seen so many busts throughout the years with guys with all this hype, and then they come up to the major leagues and do nothing. So right now, Ruchman, it's early in his career to think he's a bust or anything. So if you need a catcher, which obviously it's a very weak position in fantasy baseball, you could get Ruchman on a big discount because once this guy gets in a groove and gets comfortable in the major leagues, I think he'll break out and be a solid fantasy player this season. The next guy's another top prospect who made the roster out of spring training this year, Bobby Witt Jr., the Kansas City Royals. So Witt Jr. this season, not a great rookie year so far. 7 home runs, 28 RBIs, 29 runs scored, 8 stolen bases, but a 221 average and a 269 on base. So his on base to batting average is a bad ratio. A guy who swings early in the count and he don't work the at bat or draw walks. But the thing I like about him is stolen bases, obviously 8 already this season, which is definitely a lost art in the major leagues. And his RBI is not too horrible for a guy struggling at 28. But over the last couple weeks here, he's only hitting 216 as well. Here's Bobby Witt. And we know this Kansas City Royal team, they don't have many great hitters on the team. And obviously Witt, a top prospect that made the club this season, he's going to get an everyday opportunity. And we know shortstop is a weak position in fantasy baseball. On third base, he qualifies at as well, which is good here. So the last few games for Witt: June 1st at the Guardians, 0 for 4. June 3rd versus Houston, 1 for 4, a homer, 3 RBIs. June 4th versus Houston, 1 for 4 with a run, a rib, a stolen base. June 5th versus Houston, 0 for 3, 2 runs. June 6th versus the Blue Jays, 0 for 4. June 7th versus the Blue Jays, 0 for 4. And June 8th versus the Blue Jays, 2 for 4 with 2 runs scored. So right now, maybe he could work off that 2-hit game in yesterday's ball game. 2 for 4 is Witt here. But this guy's a good talent. He's batting third in this lineup. They got a lot of confidence in him. And he's another guy just like Ruchman. Maybe it's going to take him some time to get going, even though it's a big difference so far. He's got 204 at-bats. He's been up the whole season, where Ruchman has only been up a few weeks with 55 at-bats. But right here, Bobby Witt, you just go out there and try to get him. And right here, he's still giving fantasy owners value, like I mentioned with the stolen bases. And his RBIs aren't that bad as well. So if you need a shortstop and a guy with major upside and could get on a little bit of a discount this week, Bobby Witt is definitely a player I would go out there and buy. The next guy, Christian Yelich of the Milwaukee Brewers. So Christian Yelich, I know since his MVP season a few seasons ago, he just hasn't been the same here as Yelich. And the back has definitely been the problem, and I think the catalyst for the struggles on the season. 5 home runs, 21 RBIs, 8 stolen bases though, which is still surprising. 33 runs scored, a 224 average, and a 315 on base. So right here, the positives about Christian Yelich is obviously the stolen bases, which is good, even though a guy who's come off a major back injury, and he hasn't missed any time, already 205 at-bats on the season, and his on-base to batting average is still at a good ratio. Just this guy, we're used to him putting up huge numbers with a great batting average and power numbers, but he just hasn't been the same as Yelich over the last 2-3 seasons. Last season, only 9 homers with 51 RBIs with a 248 average. But this season here, the average is down. The RBIs are way down, only 21, and we're already 60-plus games into the Major League season here for Yelich. But this guy, once he could get things going and get that stroke back, where he's got that short, compact swing, he's going to be a problem as Yelich. And maybe the back has gone in him. And if it has, unfortunately, we've seen guys, once they have had back injuries, they're never the same in the major leagues. June 1st at the Cubs, 0 for 2. June 2nd versus the Padres, 0 for 4. June 3rd versus the Padres, 0 for 3. June 5th versus the Padres, 0 for 4. June 7th versus 2 for 4 with 2 runs. And June 8th versus the Phillies, 1 for 4. So right here, Yelich, he's been batting either first or third in this Milwaukee Brewer lineup. And right here, like I mentioned, this guy, he's been a great talent throughout his career. I know the last few seasons with the back have been a problem for him, but right now I would go out there and still try to get him. The upside's unlimited, I still think, for Yelich. And if this guy gets hot, we've seen him in his career go on a tear, even though the last few seasons he just hasn't done much for fantasy owners. And the 5th and final hit I look to buy low and trade for this week here is Dolan and Avenatto of the St. Louis Cardinals. And Avonado, the first 5-6 weeks out of the season, he came out of the gate smoking hot, but his stats have really calmed down over the last month. On the season, 10 home runs though, 39 RBIs, 25 runs scored, a 272 average, and a 344 on base. But over the last month of the season here, only batting 212 with only a 286 average with 3 homers and 15 RBIs. So right now, he's day-to-day with a bruised kneecap here is Nolan Arenado. And Arenado, last season, we saw peaks and valleys from him where the batting average wasn't great, but he still finished the season with 34 and 105. And this season here, like I mentioned, he came out first 5-6 weeks on fire, and now he cooled off big time as Arenado. But if you could get him a little bit cheaper, obviously, than when he came off the season on fire, this is the time to do it for Arenado a little bit. With banged up knee, stats are way down over the last month, but he's a guy, like I mentioned, he's going to just get going, and there's times where he's going to have down times as Arenado, where he's in a slump, and then he'll come out of nowhere and have a big week or two and carry your fantasy team. So the last few games here for him, May 31st versus the Padres, 2 for 4. June 1st versus the Padres, 3 for 4, homer, 3 RBIs, 2 runs scored. June 2nd at the Cubs, 1 for 4 with a rib. June 3rd at the Cubs, 2 for 4, run and a rib. June 4th in a doubleheader at the Cubs, 1 for 7 with 2 runs scored. June 5th at the Cubs, 1 for 5, 2 RBIs. And June 7th at the Rays, in that one, 0 for 4. And June 8th at the Rays, he sat out with the knee issue. So right here, with the knee issue and the numbers down over the last few weeks, I still think you got to pay a decent price for Arenado, but not what you had to pay for early in the season. So right now, if you could get him in time for a decent price, not overpaying, and then he breaks out again like he was early in the season, that will be a score for fantasy owners. So that's a few hitters I look to buy and trade for Week 9 of the fantasy baseball season.